On this edition of the BigFooty Essendon Podcast, I'm joined by Doss and Hirdismyhero as we dissect the latest news in the supplement scandal. As the AFL hand down charges to the Essendon Football Club, James Hird, Mark Thompson, Danny Corcoran and Dr. Bruce Reid. All that and more on this edition of the BigFooty Essendon Podcast. Yes, welcome Bomber supporters to another edition of the BigFooty Essendon Podcast. As always, I am the Prosecutor, and as the music suggests, today we'll be talking the latest in the supplement scandal as the AFL finally charge Essendon. To begin with, here's a brief summary of where the status quo currently lies. The Essendon Football Club, James Hird, Mark Thompson, Danny Corcoran and Dr. Bruce Reid were yesterday charged by the AFL under Section 1.6 of the AFL's regulations, which specifically states that where the Commission is of the opinion that a person or club has contravened the provisions of the Memorandum of Articles of Association, or the AFL regulations, or the AFL player rules, or has been involved in conduct which is unbecoming or likely to prejudice the interests or reputation of the AFL, or to bring the game of football into disrepute, the Commission may deal with any such matter in such manner as the Commission in their absolute discretion think fit, and without limiting their power, they may A. refer any matter to the tribunal or other body or person appointed by the Commission, B. appoint any person to inquire into any matter, C. conduct their own disciplinary inquiry into any matter, and or D. impose a monetary sanction as provided in these regulations/player rules. The Commission is scheduled to meet on Monday the 26th of August to hear Essendon's defence to the charges. However, Essendon could request more time, seek to impose an injunction, or even organise a settlement beforehand. In some positive news, however, it appears the players' sanctions are unlikely, as the General Counsel for the AFL, Andrew Dillon, stated last night that, quote, on information before the AFL, there is no specific anti-doping rule violation attributed to any individual player for the use of AOD 9604 or any other prohibited substance, end quote. This was followed by WADA Chief John Fahey, who stated that he had no problem with anything that the AFL had said. So after all that, it's time to have a bit of a discussion on these events. First of all, I'm joined by today Doss. Welcome to you, Doss.
Thank you, Prosecutor.
And I'm also joined by first-time podcaster Hirdismyhero. Welcome to you.
G'day boys, how you going?
I'm going well. Alright, so the first topic of discussion after hearing all that is the sanctions against the Essendon Football Club. Now, under the AFL Commission, in their extraordinary power and monopoly on what they can do, they can either fine, draft picks, strip premiership points, bar the club from competing. Pretty much, as it says, you can do anything they really want. So I guess I'll start with you, Hirdismyhero. What do you think any sanctions will be against the Essendon Football Club as a result of these charges?
I think first and foremost, you'd have to look at the sort of monetary gain the AFL have to make from this. You'd believe that a fine would be paramount. It's the same sort of thing in every sort of prosecution they've had over the past few years at least. And Essendon being a rich club probably won't make too much of a difference to them. I think after that, they'd probably be looking towards draft picks, which is a bit of a worry for mine. As we do know, we're lacking a lot of depth in our midfield, so midfield picks would be good for us to keep hold of, and that will probably set us back a little bit, losing those picks. I think the AFL's pushing very much for suspension of those 4 officials. They may settle with just 2, but I'm pretty sure they will want Hird to step down, if not step down, be suspended for a certain amount of time. After that, I can't really see too much else going on. I don't think there's going to be points stripped. That seems like an extremely harsh penalty for something that, by all accounts, isn't exactly finished or confirmed. That'd be pretty much about it, though. I can't see too much else coming from it, but if this saga's taught us anything, is that we really just don't know what the AFL's thinking about this entire thing.
And you, Dos?
Yeah, look, I'll approach it from a slightly different angle. Like one of the comments that I've heard a lot of people make in recent weeks, and in fact for a long time, has been, concerning the stripping of points in 2014, 2015, and in some extreme cases 2016. So this concept that Essendon will be made to play for nothing for the next X amount of years. I cannot possibly imagine the AFL even entertaining doing something like that, because it would compromise so many aspects of the competition in terms of how do you market the game to a set of supporters where the games just don't matter for however long that the penalty applies for. It compromises it in terms of the teams that would play Essendon twice. And yet somehow this concept has sort of gained traction. That 2014 and 2015 we've written off as well. Stripping points this year. I mean, I think it's probably fairly unlikely. Maybe a slim chance of it. But I certainly can't see any chance whatsoever of it happening in 2014 or beyond, because I just don't think the AFL would effectively shoot themselves in the foot like that. Yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, on the topic of premiership points, there's been since Paul Little's come on, there's been a growing feeling amongst the industry that we'll be particularly steadfast in our belief that we don't want points stripped of us.
Yep.
So I guess the question is, how far would you like to see the Essendon Football Club defend this so much? And would you accept the premise that if we were to admit if we were to take a points penalty, that would be an admission of guilt? I'll put that to you first, Dos.
Guilt of what? I mean, I guess that's guilt is it's a very it's a pretty broad term in this sense.
Especially with two different sort of investigations going on, one on the governance side, which is this about. However, there's the feeling that any admission of guilt in the government's is also an admission of guilt in the doping side of things, which is, patently untrue, but unfortunately that's the perception.
Yeah. There is a large distinction between the two. I mean, one can lead to another, but there's no absolute solid proof that both are the case. I mean, bad governance. I think I reckon you'd struggle to find too many who would deny that there were some pretty serious gaps in terms of checks and balances. But yeah, guilt in one facet doesn't necessarily translate to guilt in the other just yet. So, look, in terms of what I think it constitutes an admission of guilt, look, it's hard to say, because I think, look, despite all the tough talk, I do think that Essendon will probably look to meet the AFL somewhere in the middle. And which, whether that's desirable or not, I'm not really commenting on. But I do wonder whether, despite all the talk, there'd really be a desire to sort of drag this out for too much longer. Because, I mean, I think it's started to really take a toll on the players. It's sort of taken a toll on the supporters. So I don't know. I think there's a fair bit of bluster going on on both sides in terms of their public statements, and the stuff that's being expressed behind closed doors could well be different to some extent.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think both sides obviously don't want this to go to court as well, because the AFL's structures in their regulations and so forth haven't really been tested in a court of law. And as we've seen with, and the AFL know this, and as you've seen with the Melbourne case, the Adelaide case and cases before that, the AFL is hell-bent on not seeing these go before court because there's a hell of a lot that could go wrong. I mean, there's various stuff that could go wrong, like restraint of trade even, the salary cap, obviously capping one's earnings and all that sort of stuff. There's a hell of a lot that can get challenged. So, I think Essendon is going to be aggressive where appropriate.
Yeah.
And I think the threat of legal action is, as much as some people on the Hot Topic board will say is irrelevant and we're just small peas to the AFL, the problem is that could all bring down the AFL's regulations as it is. So I don't think the AFL want that, and I think there's no doubt that we'll move towards a negotiated sanction, if anything.
Yeah.
And what do you think, Hirdismyhero, do you think we'll get ultra defensive? Do you think this will go through the courts, or are you expecting a negotiated punishment as well?
Oh, look, I'll be honest, I'll be expecting negotiated punishment somewhere in the middle, but a small party wants to see Essendon take this all the way. I'm not sure what it is. It's probably not going to be the recommended sort of thing, and I highly doubt Essendon would follow through with it, but to be able to take down an organisation that, by reports, has a fair amount of, corrupt individuals inside it, wouldn't be a bad thing in my view. That said, you do have to focus on what's going on with the playing group, the people at the club, its supporters, because they are paramount. That's what keeps the game alive. That's what keeps the Essendon Football Club alive. They really need to just try and meet somewhere in the middle so we can get this finished as soon as possible, because, as Dos mentioned, it's taking its toll on the playing group and supporters, which is probably just the worst thing that's come out of this entire thing. It's just ruining lives, ruining health, that sort of thing, as we've seen with David Evans. So they just need to get it sorted out as quickly as possible, and whether that be through legal action or whether that be through just a negotiation, the quicker the better, in my view.
Yep, and I think we all agree with you on that one. We'll move on to the individuals in this case, and four officials have been charged from the Essendon Football Club. They include senior coach James Hird, senior assistant coach Mark Thompson, head of the football department Danny Corcoran, and long-time Dr. Bruce Reid. I guess the first thing when I saw these names was I was surprised to see Mark Thompson's name there. I mean, the others are the head of their departments, and I could see fair enough why, but Mark Thompson is there as an assistant coach. So I'm surprised to see him. However, I believe I did see an article this morning which stated that more charges against officials are expected to come, including assistant coaches. So, in any case, what do we make of the four individuals, and do you think any charge against them is justified? I'll start with you, Hirdismyhero. What do you think?
It's hard to really say what's going on there, because, as you said, I was kind of surprised as well with the Mark Thompson sort of charge handed down, because I really didn't think he had too much to do with it, aside from, well, I did read somewhere that he actually bought Robinson and therefore danked the club through his contacts, which could possibly be why they're looking into him. But aside from that, I can't see why. As you mentioned, the others are heads of their departments, so I could see why they'd be looking at those particular departments for a charge, and they want to go for the head honcho through it. But as has been sort of established so far, just this entire bringing the game into disrepute angle is a very broad blanket term. So I can't really see any of these charges holding up too well unless there's evidence to prove otherwise. I'm not sure what James Hird, for example, could have done just to warrant a sanction like what they're suggesting. I'm not sure what sort of charge they'd be putting, what sort of sanction they'd be putting on him. I know the charge is bringing the game into disrepute, but I guess we'd have to really see what the actual sanctions were for each of these players to kind of suggest how severe it was. It's really difficult to kind of comprehend what the AFL's trying to get across here. I think the main one that I have an issue with would be James Hird, obviously, considering username Hirdismyhero. I just don't want to see him go off from the club, because he's such a beacon of hope for all the players. When he's in a good mood and everything, the players in a good mood, they respond. But Mark Thompson has got me absolutely dumbfounded. I have no idea what's going on with him or why he's been sanctioned.
I think this comes back to the whole, the bringing the game into disrepute angle. It's really, to quote Dennis Denuto, it's the vibe type of rule, whereby there's no actual specific wrongdoing, it's just the AFL don't like the feel of it or the vibe of it. And
they don't like the feel of it, and they don't like their, for want of a better way to put it, they don't like their time being wasted.
Yeah, exactly. They just, it really, and I think coming back to Thompson, I think that vibe angle comes back to Thompson as well, whereas, he's an assistant coach, but, it's the vibe that he's a senior figure at the club, so, in the sense that they've charged him with that initial 4 group of officials. And I think Dean Robertson and the like are still going to be charged by the AFL. So there are still more to come, you'd say. But
the only issue with Robinson being charged is that he's no longer an employee of the AFL. Now, what scope does the AFL have to charge someone who's no longer employed by an organisation that's under their umbrella?
I'd suggest that they'd invite him to a hearing. If he doesn't show up, what they'll do is they'll ban him from the sport for life.
Sure, yeah, they could do that.
Yeah, as opposed to anything else, then it's really inconsequential unless he wants to apply for another job at an AFL club. However, I think that ship sailed.
I would have thought so.
Yeah.
Yep.
And have you got any other thoughts on the individuals that have been sanctioned at this point, Dos?
Yeah, look, I'd agree with what Hirdy was saying there. Thompson is the one that does stand out a bit because, he's an assistant. Look, I think in general, I guess a couple of things to keep in mind. I mean, so you look at the individuals they've charged. We being the public, we don't have all the information that the AFL presumably does. So look, there may be justifiable reasons in their view that we aren't aware of, or there may not. And I guess the other thing with the whole, disrepute angle, after everything that's gone on, 6-month investigation and just an absolute saturation load of coverage, the AFL it has to be seen to do something in the eyes of Joe Average and the public. I'm not necessarily saying that that's okay, but like either way, the entire thing is it's a PR disaster for the AFL. If they just the stigma that's attached to it is disastrous for them. And if after all that there were no heads on a stick, so to speak, to at least go after, it would probably be even more disastrous in their view, in a PR sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in the essence, what really the AFL's trying to do is throw a bone to people, to the circus that is the general public who want heads on a stick. So, I think in the end, it's going to be a hard charge for the AFL to maintain, especially if it gets challenged in an actual court of law. But I think they'll push for suspensions. Maybe in the case of Dr. Reid, they might push for a life ban.
Yeah.
They might, but obviously I think the Essendon Football Club's going to fight hell for leather to get all of them off the hook. So, and I think the other problem too is that with the negotiated penalties, any potential negotiated penalties, is that there's been such a furor about the suggestion of that anything that appears weaker than what the lynch mob want is going to be heavily ridiculed. So the AFL's really in a jam. So I don't know if they're going to actually settle for anything short of suspensions for these individuals.
They're in trouble. They've kind of walked themselves into a corner here, haven't they? I think the main thing as well is, going back to what James Hurd said a little while ago, he said in a press conference that Doc Reid himself would be vindicated. Now that's something that I completely forgot about it until this morning when I woke up and I realised that Doc Reid had been charged. His side of the story has never been even questioned. No one's even bothered to talk to him about the entire thing. Obviously, he's had to keep his mouth shut. But if James Hird said that Doc Reid is going to be vindicated personally through all this, then I'd love to hear what his story is on it, because it seems to me that his sanction may be unwarranted, and especially if they're talking about a life ban, then that's going to be a real issue for him. Because I think he's been our doctor for
40 years.
40 years. That's so. 40 years of doing completely right by the club, looking after hundreds of football families, the Shaws, Hird, Watsons, looking after them. For James Hird to have come out and said that he's going to be personally vindicated makes me think there's a bit more to Doc Reid's story than what's been put out to the media.
Yeah, and I think that especially with Doc Reid and all that sort of stuff, that if the SADA report has not shown that any, illegal substance has been emitted, and that, the letter, yes, because it was the infamous letter that Bruce Reid apparently wrote to the board where he was very critical of the program while it shut down. So I'm just wondering where the AFL's coming for this, and I think it's another case of it being the vibe rather than any actual breach of anything rather than that.
Yeah, I think unfortunately there are a lot of individuals in the story that will probably never hear their story, from an individual perspective. From Doc Reid, I suspect will be one of those. Just in terms of, I think once, if Essendon and the AFL are able to arrive at some sort of negotiated settlement, whatever those details are and severity of penalties and so on, I would suspect that one of the clauses of that would be that, that people don't sort of keep giving all these tell-all interviews and, going to a journo and having stories written about, written concerning their perspective and that sort of stuff. Look, while I certainly agree that it would be fascinating to hear the perspective of Reid and, look, as I said, a lot of people in the story, I reckon we'll be a bit disappointed on that front. I think there'll be a lot that we probably never will hear much from in terms of what they reckon happened.
Yeah, I think we're never going to hear the full story.
No.
I reckon we'll hear most of it.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be the
right.
There's always going to be the elements so that never make it to the light of day. There always is in these sort of scenarios. So I was actually surprised that we didn't get an executive summary with the charges. By that I mean, an executive summary of the interim SADA report, because I think it's been noted already, but the general public, as it stands, still have no idea what they're really being charged for. I mean, it's fair enough to say that these individuals and the club have brought the game into disrepute, but they haven't outlined what actions they did that actually contributed to that. So
Yep.
I think that needs to be made clear by the AFL, either one way or another, by the release of a summary of the ASADA report, or by stipulating the how these officials have contravened the rules.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alright, we'll move on to a bit of discussion about the steps after the club sanctioned and all that sort of stuff. And I think we'll take, for the purposes of this discussion, we'll have a look from the worst case scenario. So let's say that all those officials, Hird, Thompson, Corcoran and Reid, are all banned from the AFL for upwards of 2 years or more. The club receives loss of premiership points for this year, next year and in 2012. And that we receive a fine of $5 million and lose our draft picks for this year and next year. How would you see the club responding in that matter? I mean, what would you see happen? Do you think supporters would drop off? Do you think we'd hit Carlton levels? Or do you think that the structures are in place that it'd be a quick recovery, or we might be back even bigger than better.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here.
Yeah, no problem.
I think in terms of your comment about hitting Carlton levels, when I think we're in a better position in all senses than Carlton were in 2002. I mean, the Carlton situation was a perfect storm of their list was ageing. A lot of their best players had either retired or were about to retire. The club was already in financial trouble because of the whole Legend Stand investment with John Elliott that went very wrong. They just signed a massive contract for Dennis Pagan to coach them for 5 years. Then that hit and took, they were fined, it was about $1 million, wasn't it? $950,000 or something like that, which in 2002, that's probably the equivalent of about $2 million today. Then in terms of where their list was at, losing those draft picks was just absolutely disastrous for them. And I mean, my view at the time, and being an Essendon supporter, it might be considered a bit blasphemous, but I reckon the AFL went almost too hard on them. I think they absolutely destroyed any chance of being remotely competitive for years, and very nearly killed the club altogether.
But wasn't it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Wasn't that great though?
Oh, look, I'm not going to deny I enjoyed seeing Carlton on its knees. But I reckon the AFL will have learned from that to an extent. They probably don't want to do that to a club again. They almost destroy them completely. So look, if the scenario that you talk about, if that came to fruition for Essendon, look, it would really hurt, but I'm not sure it would kill us to the same extent that it did Carlton. Although, see, I think in terms of financial damage, not playing for points is the worst one.
Yeah.
I think a fine is, $5 million it's very steep, but I think Essendon we do have the money to pay that.
From memory, we were still sitting on war bonds from the early days.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got a decent amount of money to pay the fine. But I think premiership points, if we were not to be playing for them for the next 2 years, and I've already said I think that's pretty unlikely to happen, but if that did happen, playing devil's advocate, look, that would be very damaging for the club. How are you meant to market membership? How are you meant to market anything to your fans when the club is not playing for points?
Yeah, definitely.
It's farcical in terms of, why would you bother? You might go to the games, but ultimately it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. Why would you, spend, in some cases, $1,000 of your hard-earned money on a membership where the players, let's face it, they're probably not going to be putting in 100% because ultimately it doesn't matter whether they win or lose. So that would hurt a lot if it does come to that, but I don't think it will.
Yep.
Hirdy, what do you reckon?
Pretty much echo their sentiments, really. I think our structures are in place a fair bit better than what Carlton's were when their crisis hit in 2002. We have a fair few. I think we've got the second youngest list in the league, I think, or third or fourth, somewhere around there. We've got a very young list. And with that list, we've managed to get to a position where we've been top four for a majority of the year. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. The loss of points, though, would be a great concern to the club, obviously financially. For me, for example, I'd still pay a membership. I'd still go every week. I just love the club, and I always have. I wouldn't think that would turn away a lot of people. We'd go from record high numbers, like what we've got this year, to record lows. There'd always be the group of diehards that would go along to every game regardless. But, in terms of a membership and monetary sort of situation, obviously we're okay in terms of, money, but that would set us back a fair bit, you'd think.
And I think you also need to take into account too that if those were likely to happen, then we'd likely lose Kia, True Value Solar, and the like too.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, we'd keep Toll on, obviously, because Toll and our board have got a lot of connections going there, but I think Caltex is our main membership sponsor, so I think they'd probably bail too.
Antler have been openly supportive, so they'd stay on, but I don't think they're a major sponsor.
Yeah, exactly right. I think they just pretty much give us luggage and a nice little segment on the hanger every week.
I know True Value Solar's main man's an Essendon supporter. However, there gets to a point though where it's just not viable for him to remain, or the organisation to remain a sponsor of the club though. So
yeah, exactly right.
So I know they're going to be looking over it, and apparently the rumour is Kia want out, but they're being persuaded to stay on, at least in the interim. So,
well, you'd think. I mean, they've been fantastic about this entire thing. I mean, we haven't heard a peep from either of them throughout this entire ordeal. They haven't showed down support or anything. Like, we've given them their spots on our TV show every week. We've managed to advertise their products throughout every sort of thing that the club does. Sponsorship for Essendon, though, I wouldn't think that'd be too much of a concern after this entire thing's finished, because as everyone knows, we're one of the highest supported clubs in the country. We have one of the highest memberships. We're one of the big four clubs. Finding a new sponsor to take over wouldn't be too bad. It wouldn't be too much of a worry. I wouldn't think we'd be able to find a big name easily enough. I think the issue would be that they wouldn't be willing to pay nearly as much as what Kia did or True Value did.
Yeah. Exactly, because obviously the brand's been diminished and all that sort of stuff, and they know that we'd be desperate for sponsors in the sense. So in essence, they'd have the power in negotiations, whereas previously it'd be the ball would be in our court.
Exactly right. Yeah.
In any case, I think we've just about run out of time, so we'll wrap it up. First of all, I'd like to thank both of you for coming on. It's been a pleasure, and I'd love to have you back some other time.
No problem.
A bit of a community service announcement. Tanked 4, drinking the game into disrepute.
Yes, here we
go. Is scheduled to occur before the Carlton game. At this stage, it will be taking place at the London Hotel and Tavern in Richmond. So get along, get drunk, and should we lose to Carlton, it will all be just a distant memory, if at all.
Just like to plug on that as well. Look, I've been really impressed how everyone has on the Essendon forum has sort of banded together, and I think going along to a thing like that, to the drinks, I really hope a lot of new faces show up, because it would be nice to put some faces to the to the screen names, and some names to the screen names as well.
We're not all James Hird.
We're not all James Hird, and exactly.
Speak for yourselves.
So I hope as many people get along to that as possible, because it has been a very testing time to be an Essendon supporter, but the camaraderie that's been shown on the forum, I think, has been quite impressive, and it'd be great to put a little asterisk on that, and meet some new faces.
And also, I want to reiterate that posting history or how many posts you have is irrelevant. We've had people who are just lurkers come before, and everyone is most welcome, and it's a fantastic day. So if you can get along to it and enjoy a few drinks and some good company, and we can all head towards the Carlton game and hopefully towards a victory.
Sounds good.
And just one other announcement, that the Essendon Podcast is now on iTunes, so rather than having to wait to get home and log on to YouTube, you can hear the lovely sounds of our voices while you commute to and from work, or work out at the gym, or whatever it is you do during your spare time.
You lucky buggers.
Exactly. So
I'd be a bit disturbed if anyone is listening to it while they're working out at the gym, to be honest. But,
I can understand if they're on the treadmill and they're trying to run away from us, but any other circumstance, and I would be a bit concerned too.
Straight after this, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to listen to this back.
Exactly. So if you are at the gym and listening to this, shame on you, and let us know so we can publicly ridicule you on the forums.
Delusional curler.
Exactly. So with all that, thanks for your time, and go Bombers.
Go the Dons.
Up the Dons.
They all try their best, but they can't get near.